When I was 40 years old, I buried the man I thought I'd grow old with. John was only 42 when a sudden heart attack took him from me, leaving me with a 14-year-old boy, a mortgage, and a hollow ache in my chest that never truly went away. Daniel was my entire world after that. I promised myself, standing by that fresh mound of earth, that I would give him every opportunity his father would have wanted for him. That promise became my life's mission. Money was always tight, but I learned to stretch every dollar until it screamed. I took in sewing jobs from neighbors, patching ripped jeans and altering prom dresses until my hands cramped late into the night. In the mornings, I baked pies and cinnamon rolls to sell at the local cafe before heading to my shift at the library. On weekends, I cleaned houses for people who never bothered to learn my name. Every extra dollar went into Daniel's future. When Daniel was accepted to college, I cried. Not just from pride, but from relief. All the missed dinners, the worn-out shoes I couldn't replace, the years without a single vacation, they'd all been worth it. I sold John's old Chevy Impala, the one we'd driven across the country on our honeymoon, to pay Daniel's tuition deposit. It hurt in a way I can't explain, like saying goodbye to John all over again, but I told myself it was what any good mother would do. Then there was the summer Daniel broke his leg playing basketball. The hospital bills were more than my annual income. I had the chance to go on a once-in-a-lifetime trip to Italy with my church group. Everything paid except airfare. But I sold the ticket and used the refund to cover what insurance wouldn't. I told Daniel about the trip years later, and he laughed, saying, "Guess it's a good thing you didn't go. You would have just been bored." I never complained. Every sacrifice was a quiet choice, made out of love, stitched into the fabric of our lives. Birthdays were modest, Christmas gifts practical, but Daniel never went without what he truly needed. When he graduated, I stood in the crowd, my heart swelling as if all those late nights and early mornings had finally been redeemed. When he married Vanessa, I wrote a check that covered the reception hall deposit, then another to help with their honeymoon. "We'll pay you back," Daniel promised. I didn't believe it, but it didn't matter. I wanted their life together to start without the shadow of debt. Years passed. My hair turned silver, my knees ached more than they should, and the little house John and I bought became quieter with each season. I retired from the library at 67, a lifetime of work behind me, thinking I could finally rest. I imagined Daniel visiting with Emma, their sweet daughter, on weekends, family dinners, maybe even road trips to see the mountains. In my mind, I pictured myself sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, watching Emma play in the yard, while Daniel fixed the old fence or mowed the lawn. I believed, perhaps foolishly, that the years of sacrifice would come full circle, that my son would look at me and see not just a mother, but a woman who had given him everything she had to give. I thought love was enough to bind us together. I thought loyalty meant something. I didn't know then how wrong I was, or how quickly those beliefs would be tested. If I had, I might have prepared my heart for the moment when everything I'd built between us would be reduced to a transaction, a debt to be collected, and nothing more. For now, though, I held on to my tea and my quiet porch dreams, unaware that the storm was already moving in from the horizon. For years, I replayed the memories of Daniel's childhood like a cherished old movie, each scene painted in warm colors, each sacrifice wrapped in the glow of love. But as the reel spun on, little cracks began to appear in the film. Even in his teenage years, Daniel had a way of accepting my help without so much as a thank you. When I'd hand him lunch money or quietly cover the cost of his field trip, he'd take it with the casual air of someone picking up the mail. Routine, expected, unremarkable. At the time, I told myself it was just youth, that gratitude was something that grew with age. When he was in college, I caught the flu so badly that the doctor warned me it could turn into pneumonia. I called him one evening, my voice hoarse, and asked if he could come home for the weekend. "Mom, I can't," he said. "I've got this big project for work study, and if I miss the deadline, I'm screwed." I told him it was fine. That I understood. After we hung up, I heated up a can of soup and watched the snow fall outside, the silence of the house pressing in on me. I tried to imagine my own mother alone and sick and wondered if I would have stayed away. The answer unsettled me. It was last spring, months before the cruise, when an old envelope arrived in my mailbox, its edges worn and soft. The return address was from Linda Pierce, a friend I hadn't spoken to in nearly 2 decades. Inside was a folded letter and a smaller, faded note that stopped my breath. Linda's letter began kindly, catching me up on her life, but then her tone shifted. I wanted to thank you for what you did for Daniel years ago. I never understood how you managed it. Confused, I opened the smaller note. It was a signed IOU from Daniel to her husband, dated back to his early 20s, $2,000 borrowed for a promising investment. I remembered that year. Daniel had told me he was working extra shifts to save for something big. What he never mentioned was that the investment had failed, leaving him owing more than he could repay. I still recall the day Linda's husband came to my door. He was polite, but the weight of his words was heavy. Daniel hadn't made any payments, and the debt was months overdue. Without hesitation, I wrote a check for the full amount. I asked him not to tell Daniel. "He's young," I said. "He doesn't need another failure hanging over him." I'd forgotten all about it until Linda's letter arrived. Holding that note in my hands, I felt an odd mix of pride and sadness. Pride that I'd been able to protect him from that burden. Sadness that he'd never known, or perhaps never cared, to ask how the debt had vanished. I set the letter aside, staring out the window at the budding dogwoods. It would be easy to let bitterness take root, to tally up every moment when Daniel had taken and never given. But then I thought about Emma, his daughter, my granddaughter, and how her laugh reminded me of him at her age. Yes, Daniel had been careless with my sacrifices, blind to the cost. Yes, he'd left me to face illness alone, borrowed behind my back, and accepted my help without gratitude. But he was still my son, the boy I'd held against my chest on sleepless nights, the teenager I'd cheered for from the bleachers, the man I'd watched say, "I do," with trembling hands. I told myself that people grow, that maybe one day he'd see me clearly, not as a constant resource, but as a person with her own dreams, her own limits. Until then, I would carry the weight, just as I always had, because love, for me, had never been about keeping score. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered a warning. Sometimes the weight you carry for someone else is the same one that will pull you under. The phone rang just after lunch, when the sunlight spilled warm and lazy across my kitchen table. I'd been sorting through old photographs, John holding baby Daniel in the hospital, Daniel in his cap and gown, Emma's first birthday. I picked up the receiver without checking the caller ID. "Hey, Mom." Daniel's voice carried that false cheer I'd heard too many times before. "How's retirement treating you?" "It's peaceful," I said carefully. "I'm keeping busy. Why do you ask?" "Well," he began, drawing out the word, "Vanessa and I were talking, and we thought, what better way to celebrate your retirement than with a family cruise? 7 days in the Caribbean, all of us together. Emma's never even seen the ocean." I smiled at the thought of Emma's wide eyes, but then Daniel named the price. My smile faded. "Daniel, that's a lot of money." "Come on, Mom, this is once in a lifetime." His tone hardened, almost imperceptibly. "The deposits are already paid. We just need the balance by Monday, $13,000. You've got that, right?" I stared at the phone, my free hand tightening on the arm of my chair. "I can't give you that kind of money, Daniel. I'll pay for Emma's ticket, but that's it." Silence, then a sharp inhale. "You're serious? This is about all of us spending time together, and you're going to nickel and dime your own family?" "I'm saying no to the rest," I replied, my voice firm. "I'm not funding a vacation for 2 grown adults who should be able to pay their own way." The line went quiet long enough for me to think he'd hung up. Then, in a voice gone cold, he said, "Fine. Don't blame me when Emma asks why her grandparents couldn't come on the trip. I set the phone down slowly, a sour knot forming in my stomach. The kitchen, moments ago warm with sunlight, felt smaller somehow. 2 hours later, I heard a car door slam. Through the curtain, I saw Daniel's black SUV in the driveway. My pulse quickened. By the time I reached the front door, he and Vanessa were already inside, closing it behind them without knocking. "We need to talk," Vanessa said, her lipstick too bright against the pale strain in her face. She perched on the edge of my armchair, her designer purse clutched in her lap like a weapon. Daniel didn't sit. He paced, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the family photos on the mantel as if they were props in a room he'd rented. "This isn't just about a vacation," Vanessa began, her voice trembling just enough to seem rehearsed. "We're drowning, Maggie. Credit cards, medical bills, the mortgage, $70,000 in debt." I looked from her to Daniel. "How did you let it get that bad?" He stopped pacing. "Does it matter? We can consolidate with a personal loan, but we need collateral. Your house. One signature, Mom, and it's fixed." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You want me to put my home at risk because you can't manage your spending?" "It's not like that," Vanessa said quickly. "This is temporary. Once Daniel's new contract kicks in—" "No," I said, the word sharp and final. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "You're being selfish." I laughed once, bitterly. "Selfish? I worked 50 years for what little I have. I sold your father's car to pay your tuition. I gave up trips, clothes, even decent meals so you could have what you wanted. Now you want me to gamble the roof over my head?" The air in the room tightened. Vanessa shifted in her seat, but Daniel stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the carpet. "If you don't help us, Emma's going to suffer. She's going to see her parents lose everything, and it'll be because her grandmother wouldn't lift a finger." I felt that blow in my chest. He knew exactly where to strike. My love for Emma was the one currency he could still exploit. "I'll pay for her ticket," I repeated quietly, "but I won't sign my house away." For a moment, the three of us stood frozen in the stale afternoon light. Then Daniel snatched his keys from the coffee table. "Don't expect us to forget this." The door slammed so hard the picture frames rattled. I sank into my chair, the cushions swallowing me whole. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's lawnmower hummed. Normal life carrying on as if my own had not just been cracked open. I thought of Emma's smile, of the way she ran to hug me whenever she visited. I wondered if Daniel was right, if she'd look at me differently after this. The thought hurt, but not enough to make me regret saying no. Not yet. Still, the knot in my stomach told me this wasn't over. Daniel's anger hung in the air long after the slam of the front door. I sat motionless, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea I no longer remembered making. The clock ticked on the mantel, its steady rhythm mocking the chaos in my chest. 15 minutes later, the sound of their SUV door opening again reached my ears. I looked out the window just as Vanessa stepped out alone, her heels clicking sharply on the walkway. She let herself in without knocking. "Maggie," she said with a calmness that felt unnatural after the shouting match we'd just had. "I came back because I want you to think about this logically." I didn't answer, so she went on. "If you can't sign the loan, there's another option. You could sell the house outright. The market's good right now. With the equity, you'd still have enough to move somewhere smaller and help us clear our debt." My breath caught. Sell my house? The one John and I bought before Daniel was born? "It's just a building," she said lightly, as if the decades of memories could be boxed up and thrown in the attic. "And if you think about it, this place wouldn't even be yours if Daniel hadn't kept helping you with the bills all these years." The statement landed like a slap. "Kept helping me?" I repeated, but she was already gathering her purse again, her eyes cool and flat. She left as quickly as she'd arrived, but her words echoed in the empty room. I thought about every mortgage payment I'd scraped together, every second job I'd taken. Daniel had never paid a cent toward this house. Why would she say something like that? Unless they'd told themselves that lie so often they believed it? That evening, I called Emma. She answered from her room, the muffled sound of cartoons in the background. "Hi, Grandma." Her voice lifted me as it always did. We talked about her school play, the dress she wanted to wear on the cruise, how excited she was for just us time. Then, in her matter-of-fact little voice, she said, "Daddy told Mommy that you only have the house because he takes care of you now. He said you don't really make money anymore, so it's kind of his anyway." The cartoon voices kept chattering through the phone, but I couldn't hear them. My throat tightened until I could barely speak. "Did he really say that, Emma?" "Uh-huh," she replied innocently. "But I told him that's silly because you're the strongest person I know." I forced a laugh for her sake, but when we hung up, my composure cracked. My own son had been planting this falsehood in his daughter's mind, dismissing a lifetime of work and sacrifice with one arrogant sentence. Anger surged first, hot and blinding. Then came the drop, the dizzying free fall into something heavier, disappointment so deep it pressed against my ribs. I had spent years shielding Emma from the strain between her parents and me. I told myself that whatever my issues with Daniel, she didn't need to bear them. But now I realized I also had to shield her from something worse, his casual rewriting of history, his diminishing of my worth. The phone lay silent on the table as I stared at it, thinking of all the times I had chosen to believe the best in him, all the times I had mistaken convenience for closeness. If he could speak about me that way to his own child, then what else was he capable of? The thought was a sharp downward twist in my chest. And yet, as low as it brought me, I felt another current rising beneath it, an unshakable resolve. I could not give him my home. I could not give him the satisfaction of watching me crumble. And above all, I could not let him poison Emma against me. I walked to the window, watching the late sunlight fade over the yard John had mowed 1,000 times. My voice was steady when I whispered to the empty room, "Not this time." The storm between us wasn't over, but in that moment I knew one thing for certain. I would fight, not for the house, not for the money, but for the truth of who I was, and for the little girl who still believed in me. The morning of the cruise dawned crisp and bright, the kind of spring day that felt full of promise. I met Daniel, Vanessa, and Emma at the port, clutching my small suitcase and a heart full of cautious optimism. For Emma's sake, I told myself, I could make it through a week of strained smiles and forced civility. The ship loomed over the harbor like a floating city, white hull gleaming under the sun. Emma clutched my hand as we walked the gangway. "Grandma, look, it's bigger than my school." Her awe was contagious, and I found myself smiling as we boarded. A uniformed crew member checked our cabin keys and directed us toward the elevators. Daniel and Vanessa's cabin was on deck 5, an interior room with no windows. Emma and I were assigned a smaller suite on deck 8, overlooking the ocean. I'd insisted on paying for it so she could watch the waves from our balcony. From the start, there was a quiet wall between us. Daniel and Vanessa offered polite nods in passing, but avoided real conversation. We ate in different dining rooms for the first 2 meals, under the guise of different schedules. It was clear this was not a trip for family bonding. Still, I refused to let their coldness infect my time with Emma. We explored the kids' club together that first afternoon, and I watched her make friends over a shared love of pirate costumes. The next day, we swam in the shallow pool, her laughter ringing out over the splash of water. At dinner, she told me about a trivia game she'd won, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Those moments, the pure, uncomplicated joy of a child, were my refuge. In her company, the tension faded to a distant hum. I almost began to believe that maybe the worst of the conflict was behind us. On the second night, I sat on our balcony, a blanket over my knees, watching the moon paint silver ripples across the dark water. Emma had gone to her parents' cabin to fetch a book she'd left there. The sound of the ocean was hypnotic, and I let my mind drift. The cabin door slammed open so suddenly I nearly dropped my teacup. Emma burst inside, breathless, her face pale under the soft lamplight. "Grandma," she whispered, shutting the door behind her. Her small hands clutched mine so tightly my fingers ached. "What is it, sweetheart?" Her eyes darted to the hallway as if making sure no one had followed her. "I heard them," she said, her voice shaking. "Mom and Dad. They were in the bathroom, talking. They think I couldn't hear through the door, but I did." I brushed her hair back from her face. "What did you hear?" "They said they're going to put something in your drink tomorrow night. Something to make you sleepy. And then..." Her lips trembled. "They said they'd take you out on deck and push you over. They said it would look like an accident." The blood in my veins turned to ice. "Emma, are you sure?" She nodded fiercely. "They even talked about when the security people changed shifts. They said there would be 15 minutes with hardly anyone around." I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay calm. "You did the right thing telling me. You're very brave." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't want them to hurt you." I pulled her into my arms, holding her close. My mind raced, shock, disbelief, and then something colder. The realization that this wasn't a heat-of-the-moment threat. They'd planned this, thought it through. "Listen to me," I said, pulling back just enough to meet her eyes. "You need to stay away from them unless I'm there. Tomorrow you'll go to the kids' club for movie night. You stay there until I come get you. Promise me." She hesitated. "But what about you?" I tried to smile. "Let me worry about that. Sometimes the best way to stop someone's plan is to let them think it's working." Her brow furrowed, but she nodded slowly. I could feel her heartbeat still racing against my chest. That night, long after she'd fallen asleep in the smaller bed beside mine, I sat awake, staring at the dark line where the sea met the sky. My son wanted me gone. My daughter-in-law was willing to help him, and only a 10-year-old's courage stood between me and the cold, black water. Tomorrow would bring choices I never imagined I'd have to make. But one thing was certain. I would not be the one to fall. For hours after Emma fell asleep, I sat at the small desk in our cabin, my fingers steepled under my chin. The words she'd spoken replayed over and over, each time sinking deeper into the marrow of my bones. My son, my only child, planning my death. But as the minutes stretched toward midnight, doubt began to creep in. Emma was only 10. Children mishear things, misunderstand adult conversations. Maybe, just maybe, she'd caught a snippet and built a frightening story around it. I clung to that possibility the way a drowning person clings to driftwood. The next morning, I decided to test the waters before letting fear take root. Emma spent breakfast in the kids' club, so I took a seat at a small table in the main dining hall, a book open in front of me. Halfway through my tea, I saw Vanessa enter. She was alone, her phone in one hand, a bright smile plastered across her face as she approached a passing waiter. "Excuse me," she said, her tone conspiratorial. "Do you have a cocktail that's, light, sweet, but makes you sleepy?" The waiter tilted his head. "You mean something relaxing?" "Yes," she replied, lowering her voice further. "Something you don't really taste, but it works quickly." The words hit me like a splash of cold seawater. My stomach tightened, my fingers curling against the book's spine. The waiter made a suggestion. I barely heard it. Vanessa thanked him, moving on as if she'd just asked about dessert. Any lingering hope that Emma had misunderstood crumbled. The seed of fear sprouted roots. When I picked Emma up later, she clung to my arm more tightly than usual. "Did you talk to them?" she asked in a whisper. "No, sweetheart, but I saw something today that made me think you might be right." Her eyes darted around before she spoke again. "There's more." A cold heaviness settled in my chest. "More?" She nodded, her voice barely audible over the hum of the elevator. "Last night, after I told you, I went back to get my teddy bear from their room. They didn't know I was there. I heard them say, if the drink doesn't work, they could take you to the upper deck, near the lifeboats. They said the rails are low there. They could accidentally bump you when no one's looking. The elevator door slid open, but I couldn't move for a moment. My mind's eye painted the image in vivid detail. 2 shadows flanking me, the sudden shove, the shock of open air, the black water swallowing everything. I forced myself to step out, guiding Emma toward our cabin, my grip firm on her small hand. "You did the right thing telling me," I said again, though the words felt thin against the weight pressing down on me. The rest of the day passed in a strange haze. On the surface, nothing changed. Families laughed by the pool, waiters carried trays of tropical drinks, the sun lit the waves in shades of turquoise and gold. But beneath it all, I felt the ship itself becoming smaller, the walls closing in. Somewhere on board, 2 people I had once trusted more than anyone were counting the hours until they could make their move. That night, Emma and I skipped the main dining room. I told her we'd have a picnic in our cabin. Sandwiches from the cafe, fruit and juice boxes. She giggled as we arranged them on the balcony table, the wind lifting her hair. For a brief moment, I let myself soak in the peace, the stars scattered across the ink-dark sky, the hum of the ship's engines, the sound of her laughter. Then I remembered Vanessa's question to the waiter. "Sweet, quick, makes you sleepy." The peace shattered like glass. I leaned back in my chair, studying Emma's face in the dim light. She looked so young, so trusting. "You're very brave, you know," I told her. She shrugged, embarrassed. "I just don't want anything bad to happen to you." Her words were simple, but they anchored me. Fear could paralyze, but love could forge steel in the spine. Somewhere between the clink of silverware and the sound of the ocean against the hull, the fear that had been gnawing at me all day shifted into something sharper, more solid. Determination. If they thought I was a passive old woman drifting through retirement without teeth or claws, they were wrong. I smiled faintly, though my mind was already turning, planning. "We're going to be smart about this," I said softly. "And we're going to stay together, no matter what." She nodded, a flicker of relief in her eyes. Later, after she'd fallen asleep again, I stood at the balcony rail, looking out over the endless dark water. The ship moved steadily forward, slicing through the waves. I wasn't sure yet how, but I knew one thing. I would not give Daniel and Vanessa the chance to decide my fate. I had been underestimated before in my life, by bosses, by neighbors, by strangers, but never like this, and never with so much at stake. The calm of the night wrapped around me, a deceptive lull before the next turn of the tide. I could feel the chart of my emotions like the swell of the sea, up in the quiet peace, down into the icy fear, up again with the heat of resolve. They had no idea I was ready. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the cabin, turning the white bedding golden. Emma was still asleep, her hair a tousled halo on the pillow. I dressed quietly, my mind set on the next step. I couldn't afford to confront Daniel and Vanessa without proof. If I accused them outright, they'd deny it, twist the story, maybe even turn Emma against me. No, what I needed was something undeniable. After breakfast, I suggested Emma join a morning arts and crafts workshop in the kids' club. She was reluctant to let me out of her sight, but when I promised to be back before lunch, she agreed. Once she was safely inside, I walked to the quieter end of Deck 5. Their cabin was there, number 517. I positioned myself a few doors down, pretending to study a wall map of the ship. It didn't take long. I saw them return from the cafe, Vanessa carrying 2 cups of coffee. They disappeared inside. I waited. My heart thudded in my chest as I slipped closer. Phone in hand, voice recorder open, but the screen dark. Through the thin cabin walls, voices carried surprisingly well. Vanessa. Last night she stayed in her room. We'll have to try again. Daniel. The drinks would have worked if she'd joined us. Tonight, during her walk, like we planned. Vanessa. Near the lifeboats. 15 minutes without patrol. The casual way they spoke about ending my life made my skin crawl. It was like listening to 2 people plan a shopping trip. I leaned just close enough to capture every word, willing my hands not to tremble. When Daniel said, "By the time they find her, we'll be back in our cabin," I knew I had what I needed. I stepped away quickly, heart hammering. I didn't stop moving until I reached the elevators, the recording safe on my phone. The ship's security office was tucked away behind the purser's desk. Inside, a middle-aged man in a crisp uniform looked up from a stack of reports. His name tag read, Chief Security Officer Harris. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "My name is Maggie Hayes. I have reason to believe 2 passengers are planning to harm me." His brows drew together. "That's a serious accusation." I placed my phone on his desk and hit play. As the muffled but unmistakable conversation filled the small room, his expression shifted from skepticism to grim focus. "Do you know these passengers?" he asked when the recording ended. "They're my son and daughter-in-law." There was a pause, a flicker of something like pity in his eyes, but he didn't comment on it. "We'll need to take this to the captain," he said finally, "and we'll need a plan." That was exactly what I'd been thinking. "I want to catch them in the act," I said. "No question about intent, no way for them to explain it away." His mouth tightened. "That's dangerous. You'd be putting yourself directly in harm's way." "I'm already in harm's way," I replied. "This way, at least, we control the timing." We spent the next 30 minutes mapping out the trap. I would take my usual evening walk on Deck 9 near the lifeboats at precisely 11:15 p.m., 15 minutes after the patrol shift changed, just as they'd planned. Security officers would be stationed out of sight at both ends of the deck, with one hidden behind the lifeboat station. If Daniel or Vanessa made a move, they'd step in immediately. The risk was real, but the thought of ending this constant dread made my spine straighten. Before I left, Harris asked about Emma. "Where will she be during this?" "In the kids' club. They have a movie night from 7 to midnight. She won't leave until I get her." He nodded. "We'll keep a crew member nearby, just in case." I walked out of the security office, feeling the weight of what was ahead, but also a strange sense of calm. For the first time in days, I had more than fear on my side. I had a plan. When I picked up Emma for lunch, she immediately searched my face. "Did something happen?" I smiled as warmly as I could. "Something's gonna happen, but we're gonna be ready for it. Tonight you'll have a special night with your friends, and tomorrow you and I will watch the sunrise together." She looked uncertain, but nodded. For the rest of the afternoon, I kept our routine as normal as possible. Ice cream by the pool, a walk through the gift shop, a round of mini golf on the upper deck. But underneath the light conversation and the shared laughter, my mind stayed on the trap we'd set. By evening, as I dropped Emma off at the kids' club, my heart was pounding again. I knelt to hug her. "I'll see you after the movie, sweetheart." "Be careful," she whispered. I squeezed her hand once before letting go. The net was ready. Now, it was only a matter of time before the betrayers stepped into it. Chief Harris leaned back in his chair, the faintest frown tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Mrs. Hayes," he said carefully, "you understand that at sea, we deal with a lot of passenger disputes, misunderstandings, exaggerations, sometimes even false reports. You're under a lot of stress and, well," I caught the look in his eyes before he finished the sentence. The same look a doctor once gave me when I insisted my hip pain was more than just getting older. "You think I'm imagining this?" I said flatly. "I didn't say that," he replied, but the hesitation in his voice confirmed it. The anger that surged up surprised me. I had survived 30 years as a purchasing manager in a cutthroat textile firm where every contract negotiation could make or break the year. I'd stared down smug executives twice my size without flinching, and I wasn't about to be dismissed like a senile old woman on a pleasure cruise. I have proof, I said sharply, tapping the phone on his desk. And if you doubt my memory, you can match the voices to the passenger registry. But let me make something clear. If you don't take this seriously and something happens to me, my lawyer will make sure your name is on the front page of every paper from Miami to London. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if recalibrating his opinion. I'll take this to the captain, he said finally. When we entered Captain Lewis's private quarters, he was standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the horizon. His silver hair and weathered face gave him the look of a man who had seen storms most people couldn't imagine. Harris explained the situation, playing the recording. When it ended, the captain turned to me. "You're suggesting we stage an operation to catch your son and his wife in the act?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm not asking you to put me in danger without reason. I'm asking you to take an opportunity to stop two people who believe they can get away with murder at sea." He studied me for a long moment. "You've thought this through." I allowed a small smile. "Negotiation was my profession for 3 decades. I know how to set terms." His lips quirked just slightly. "Very well, we'll do it your way, but you follow our timing and signals exactly." It was settled. The trap was in place. That evening, I dressed for dinner deliberately. Navy cardigan, silver pendant, nothing that would suggest I was aware of the danger. I picked Emma up from the pool to walk her to the kids' club, then lingered outside the dining room, scanning the crowd for Daniel and Vanessa. They appeared side by side, Vanessa in a coral dress, Daniel carrying something small, wrapped in blue paper. My pulse kicked up. "Hey, Mom," Daniel said with a smile that looked almost genuine. We wanted to give you something before dinner." He handed me the package. Inside was a delicate seashell pendant on a silver chain. "It's from the gift shop," Vanessa said lightly. "We thought it might match your eyes." For a moment, my chest tightened. Was it possible? Had they changed their minds? Was this some clumsy attempt to mend fences? But then I noticed Daniel's eyes, not warm, not apologetic, but watchful, measuring my reaction. I thanked them politely, fastening the clasp behind my neck. The cool metal lay against my skin like a reminder. Whatever game they were playing, I was still a piece on their board. As they drifted toward their table, I felt the emotional seesaw inside me. Hope, suspicion, the faint sting of wanting to believe they'd decided against it. But the memory of Emma's trembling voice cut through that illusion like a knife. By the time I took my seat in the lounge to wait for the 11:15 walk, my pulse was steady again. The security team would be in position, Emma was safe, and I was ready. The stage was set, the curtain about to rise. Whatever performance Daniel and Vanessa had prepared, they had no idea the audience they were playing to. The ocean stretched out in every direction, a dark velvet expanse dotted with glimmers of moonlight. The hum of the ship's engines was a low, steady throb beneath my feet as I stepped onto Deck 9, the night air sharp with salt. I kept my hands clasped behind my back, moving at an unhurried pace, the picture of an elderly woman enjoying a peaceful stroll. Every detail of my appearance was intentional. I wanted them to think I was relaxed, distracted, unaware. My gray hair was neatly combed, my cardigan buttoned against the wind. The silver seashell pendant Daniel had given me earlier swung lightly with each step, an ironic gift from the hands that meant to push me into the ocean. I had chosen my spot carefully earlier in the day, mid-deck, starboard side, just beyond the lifeboat station. It was here the patrol shift would change, leaving a 15-minute gap in which my would-be murderers planned to act. What they didn't know was that 3 security officers were already in position, 2 hidden in shadowed alcoves, 1 crouched behind the nearest lifeboat housing. The minutes ticked by. I forced myself to look out at the water, pretending to admire the scattered silver reflections. My ears strained for footsteps, for the scrape of rubber soles on the metal deck. "Mom?" Daniel's voice came from behind me, carrying that too bright tone he used when masking irritation. I turned slowly, schooling my features into mild surprise. "Daniel," I said, as if we'd simply bumped into each other. "Couldn't sleep." He was wearing dark slacks and a windbreaker, his hands buried in his pockets. Behind him, Vanessa emerged from the shadows, her coral dress replaced with black leggings and a fitted jacket. The smile she wore was thin, brittle. "We were worried about you," she said smoothly, stepping closer. "Out here all alone. It can be dangerous at night." The way she said dangerous made the fine hairs on my neck rise. Daniel drifted to my left, Vanessa to my right, their movement slow and deliberate. The gap between me and the rail shrank with each step they took. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady but loud in my ears. 10 feet from the rail, 8, 6. Balance isn't what it used to be, huh, Mom? Daniel's tone was almost conversational. I tilted my head, meeting his gaze without blinking. "My balance is fine, Daniel. My hearing, too. Well enough to catch a conversation through a cabin wall." His smile faltered, just for a heartbeat. Vanessa's eyes flickered, her jaw tightening. "I know," I continued, my voice calm but carrying. "I know about the drink. I know about the railing. And I know you planned it for tonight." For a moment, the only sound was the whisper of the ocean below. Then Daniel stepped forward quickly, his hand shooting out to grip my arm. I'd been ready for that. My other hand was already at my pocket, fingers closing around the cold metal of the emergency whistle. I lifted it to my lips and blew, the shrill sound splitting the quiet night air like a knife. The effect was immediate. From the shadows, 2 officers rushed forward, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Officer Harris appeared from behind the lifeboat station, his voice firm. "Step away from her now." Daniel's grip loosened, his hands rising slowly as the officers closed in. Vanessa froze, her expression shifting from cold determination to wide-eyed shock. Whether at being caught or at the sudden collapse of their plan, I couldn't tell. "This isn't what it looks like," Daniel said quickly, but the desperation in his voice betrayed him. "We were just forcing me toward the railing," I interrupted. "Just making sure I wouldn't live to see tomorrow?" "Ma'am, are you hurt?" Harris asked as he positioned himself between me and Daniel. "No," I said, my voice steady now that the adrenaline was receding, "but I might have been if you'd been 30 seconds later." Vanessa found her voice turning it sharp. "She's lying. We were helping her back inside." "Save it for the report," Harris said curtly. "You're both coming with us." The officers moved in, securing their wrists with plastic restraints. Daniel's eyes locked on mine as they began to lead him away. "This isn't over, Mom," he said, his tone low but venomous. "You'll regret this." I met his glare without flinching. "The only thing I regret is realizing too late the kind of man you've become." They were escorted toward the interior doors, their footsteps fading into the hum of the ship. I stayed at the rail a moment longer, gripping the cold metal, letting the ocean air wash over me. The danger had passed, for now, but I knew this wasn't the end. Still, as I turned toward the warm glow of the interior, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Tonight, I had faced them, and I had won. Daniel's hand tightened on my arm just before the shrill blast of the whistle pierced the night. His face was inches from mine now, the faint scent of alcohol and cologne mixing with the cold, salt air. His voice dropped to a whisper, low enough that only I could hear. "We'll go together, Mom, over the rail. That way you won't be alone when it happens." The words were like ice water down my spine, so much darker than anything I'd imagined. This wasn't just greed. This was the warped sentiment of a man who thought he could wrap murder in the shroud of some twisted mercy. The footsteps of the security team pounded closer, but before they could reach us, Vanessa lunged. Her palm slammed against my shoulder with sudden force, the rail pressing hard into my back. The world tilted for a heartbeat, my fingers scrabbled for purchase. And then, "Stop!" The scream cut through the chaos. Emma! She was running toward us from the far end of the deck, hair flying, eyes wide with terror. She wasn't in the children's activity lounge as I'd arranged. She was here, in the open, where Daniel and Vanessa could see her. The shock froze everyone for half a second. It was enough. Vanessa's shove lost its momentum, her balance faltering. I seized the rail with both hands, regaining my footing just as Emma collided into my side, wrapping her arms around my waist. "You leave my grandma alone," she shouted, her small voice fierce against the vast night sky. Daniel's expression twisted into something unreadable, part rage, part fear. He glanced at Emma, then at me, and for a split second, I saw the calculations running behind his eyes. She was a witness now. A gasp from behind made me turn my head. One of the passengers, an older man in a red windbreaker, stood a few feet away, phone held high, camera recording. His eyes were locked on us, capturing every movement, every word. "I've got the whole thing," he said, voice steady despite the tension. "Keep talking if you want to explain yourselves later." Vanessa's face drained of color. Daniel swore under his breath, his grip loosening. The sound of pounding feet grew louder, and seconds later, Officer Harris and two other security guards burst from the shadows, flashlights cutting through the scene. "Step away from them!" Harris barked, moving between me and my son. Daniel raised his hands, but his voice came fast, desperate. "This isn't what it looks like." "Save it," the man in the red windbreaker said, stepping forward to show the glowing phone screen. They were pushing her toward the rail, and that girl, he gestured toward Emma, saved her. Harris took the phone, his eyes scanning the footage as another guard gently guided Emma toward the interior door. "This is more than enough," Harris said grimly. "You're both coming with us." Vanessa tried for one last deflection. "We were just..." "Helping me to an early grave?" I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. We all heard the words, and now the world will too. As the guards secured their wrists, Daniel looked over his shoulder at me. "You could have kept this in the family, Mom." "And you could have been a son," I replied, the wind tearing the words away almost before they left my lips. They were led inside, their figures swallowed by the warm light of the corridor, leaving me on the deck with the man in the red windbreaker. He gave me a small nod. "You don't know me, but I know what I saw," he said quietly. "If you need me to talk to the captain, I will. Some things you don't just walk past." I thanked him, my hand still trembling as the weight of the moment pressed in. My gaze found Emma in the doorway, safe now, her eyes never leaving mine. I managed a smile for her, but inside, the image of Daniel's whisper, the rail at my back, and that fleeting look in his eyes would haunt me for years. Still, the truth was out, and this time, it wasn't just my word against theirs. The security office smelled faintly of coffee and metal polish. Daniel and Vanessa sat cuffed in two separate chairs across the room, their faces a mix of defiance and unease. Emma was safe in the next cabin over, guarded by a kind-faced steward who had volunteered to keep her company. Officer Harris closed the door behind us. "We'll need to alert the authorities at our next port, ma'am," he began. "This is a clear case of attempted harm." But I shook my head before he could continue. "Not yet. I want them confined to their cabin until we reach home port. No public spaces, no contact with other passengers, meals delivered to the door. Let them sit in their own silence and think." Harris hesitated. "Mrs. Bennett, with all due respect, these are serious charges." "I know," I said, my voice steady, "but Emma's already been through enough. She doesn't need the image of her parents in handcuffs paraded in front of strangers. Let them stew in that small, locked room. It'll be worse than a spectacle." The captain, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "We can do that, but the moment we dock, they'll have to answer to the proper authorities. Understand?" I nodded. "By then, I'll be ready. But until then, I want the last days of this trip to belong to my granddaughter. With that settled, Harris ordered 2 guards to escort Daniel and Vanessa to their cabin. Neither spoke as they were led away, though Daniel's eyes found mine, full of unspoken words I no longer cared to hear. The next morning, the ship was alive with laughter and the scent of warm pastries drifting from the breakfast buffet. I found Emma at the kids' activity lounge, coloring a picture of a dolphin with fierce concentration. When she saw me, her face lit up. "Grandma, look, I'm making this one for you." She held up the drawing proudly, the dolphin smile stretching from fin to fin. I knelt beside her. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. How about we make today an adventure day? Just us." We swam in the pool until our fingers wrinkled, then shared a plate of fresh fruit on the sun deck. In the afternoon, we joined a small tour group for a cooking class, laughing as Emma tried and failed to flip a crepe without splattering batter. Every moment with her felt like reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd lost. The pure, unburdened joy of simply being with someone who loves you for who you are, not for what you can give. Occasionally, I would pass by Deck 5 where Daniel and Vanessa's cabin was located. The curtains stayed drawn. A guard stood nearby at all times. I never knocked, never lingered, just kept walking. They had made their choices. Now they could live with them. The final evening of the cruise arrived with a sky painted in shades of lavender and rose. Emma and I stood on the balcony of our cabin, watching the horizon fade into night. She leaned against me, her small hands wrapped around the railing. "Grandma," she asked quietly, "are Mom and Dad in trouble?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "They made some very bad choices, honey. And when people do that, sometimes they have to face consequences. But you and I, we're safe. That's what matters now." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the endless dark water below. "I'm glad you're safe. I don't want to lose you." "You won't," I promised, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Not as long as I have breath in my body." The next morning, as the ship slid into harbor, the air was thick with the clamor of departure. Rolling suitcases, shouted instructions, the distant cry of seagulls. Emma and I stood ready by the gangway, our bags packed, her dolphin drawing tucked carefully into my purse. Behind us, Daniel and Vanessa were escorted off by security through a separate exit. I didn't watch them go. There was nothing left to say. Hand in hand, Emma and I stepped off the ship into the bright morning sun, the salt air filling my lungs. Whatever came next, police reports, legal proceedings, family fractures, could wait. For now, I carried only the warmth of her small hand in mine and the quiet knowledge that we had survived. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice in the traditional sense. It was something quieter, steadier. A victory measured not by the downfall of my enemies, but by the safety of the one person who still saw me with love in her eyes. The second morning after their confinement began, a folded piece of paper appeared on the breakfast tray, delivered to my cabin. The steward swore he didn't know how it got there, said the kitchen had sent it along with the fruit plate. The handwriting was unmistakable, Vanessa's sharp, looping script. I hesitated before opening it, half hoping for an apology that might mean something. At first glance, the letter seemed conciliatory. Apologies for misunderstandings, vague admissions about letting stress get the better of us. But as I read on, my stomach turned. Between the lines, buried in pretty phrasing, were sentences that felt like daggers. It would be a shame if Emma's image of her grandmother were to change when she's older. We can forgive and forget, provided you remember where your loyalties should lie. It wasn't contrition. It was a warning. I tore the letter in half, then in half again, until the pieces were too small to piece back together. The threat was clear. They weren't finished with me, but I wasn't finished either. That afternoon, while Emma attended a crafts workshop, I locked my cabin door and pulled out my small leather portfolio. Inside were my will, insurance papers, and the trust documents I had never quite gotten around to finalizing. For years, Daniel had been the primary beneficiary. It had seemed only natural. But now, as I scanned the clauses, I could feel my pen grow heavier in my hand. With deliberate strokes, I signed the amendments that would transfer every dollar, every piece of property, every investment into a trust for Emma, accessible only when she turned 25. The trustee would be my longtime attorney back in Charleston, a man I trusted more than my own blood. Daniel's name vanished from every page. The ink seemed to dry faster than usual, as if eager to seal the change. That night, Emma and I sat on the balcony, the soft slap of waves against the hull below. She was braiding a friendship bracelet, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. "Grandma," she said without looking up, "what happens when we get home?" I smoothed her hair gently. "Life goes on, sweetheart. We'll have ice cream at that shop you love. We'll walk by the river, and you'll know that no matter what, you have a place where you're safe." The next morning was the last of the voyage. The air was crisp, and the skyline was a faint smudge on the horizon. Passengers bustled with suitcases and last-minute photographs, but then came the announcement over the ship's intercom. Would Mr. Daniel Bennett and Mrs. Vanessa Bennett please report to the captain's office immediately? The words sliced through the morning chatter. I caught a glimpse of them from the upper deck as two crew members intercepted them near the gangway. Their expression shifted from confusion to something darker. Unease, perhaps even fear. They were led away, disappearing behind the door marked "Captain's Quarters." No one around me knew why, and I didn't offer an explanation. Emma tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma, what's happening?" I smiled faintly, keeping my voice calm. "Just ship business, darling. Nothing we need to worry about." But inside, I felt the same flicker of anticipation that comes before a curtain rises at the theater. I didn't know exactly what the captain intended, whether it was a stern lecture, an official warning, or a final piece of paperwork that would haunt them long after we disembarked. And I realized it didn't matter. The point wasn't to see their punishment. The point was that Emma and I were walking down that gangway together, free, and their power over us had ended the moment I stopped letting them hold it. We stood at the railing, watching the harbor grow closer, the water catching glints of morning gold. Emma leaned her head against my arm, bracelet finished and tied around my wrist. Whatever awaited Daniel and Vanessa behind that closed door was their problem now. Mine was making sure the little girl beside me never had to doubt where she belonged. The ship's horn sounded deep and final, as if closing the chapter for all of us.